I never wanted to be a teacher. So 25 years ago, I was working behind a bar, certain I was on my way to becoming a geologist. So physics was just the fastest one-year diploma to get me there. Then 15 unteachable teenagers gave up their only break of the morning to hear me talking about Mars. And that plan of becoming a geologist never made it past the first year. Because what happened over the next 10 minutes quietly changed the direction of my entire life. And 10 years later, one of those students found me in the gym and gave me a rude awakening. Now, if you've been told that this generation is lost, that kids don't care anymore, that it's the phones and it's their attention and everything's just gone, I want you to sit with what happened in that room. Because here's the thing. This happened 25 years ago. And there were no phones yet, nothing to blame, and I still had to earn that room as a teacher. Which tells you it was never really about the phones. So let me take you back to the classroom. So I was 25 years old. It was my first year, Rotterdam South, basically a tough part of the city. A school for the kids that nobody else really knew what to do with. 3 or 4 months in, this is what a normal Tuesday would look like. So imagine it. A kid, 2 rows up, leans over to his neighbor and says, "Dude, that guy just said something about your mom." And 2 seconds later, a chair is flying through the room. And that was not unusual. Now, as a kid, I grew up on Discovery Channel. As a kid, I would just disappear into it. Space and the planets and the deep ocean and what have you. It never left me, and it always stuck into the back of my mind. So it's 3 minutes before the break, and out of nowhere, one of the boys just asked me, "Sir, can we actually live on Mars?" And I think, oh, that's a good one. But there's no time. They're about to get their only break in the morning. So I say, "Guys, I'd love to, but you've got your only break in a minute. And this doesn't work if I explain it to 2 of you while everyone else is halfway out the door." And this one kid just looks at me and goes like, "Yeah, okay, but I want to know now." So he wants to know now. So I say, the only way I do this is if every single one of you decides on your own to give up your break and stay in this room. Every one of you. So put up your hand if you want to stay in. So I see all the hands go up, and I still remember just standing there thinking, what is happening right now? Nobody prepared me for that. And I said, "Are you sure? You know that you cannot even eat in here?" And there's 15 kids all raised their hands. And they just went, no problem. So I start drawing. And I have to be honest with you. I'm a terrible artist. Genuinely awful. I have no idea how I became a teacher in that way, but I'm up there making this lopsided dome, explaining what won't grow on Mars and why you'd need the dome, and that under the surface there's ice, which means in principle there's water that you could melt. And they're locked in on their break. And nobody's watching the clock anymore. And that's the exact moment the door opened. Because about 10 minutes into the break, the director walks past, or the principal, and the man who hired me. He looks in, sees a full classroom during break time and says, "Mr. Huisman, what's going on here? Does the class have detention? Have they been bad?" And before I can even open my mouth, the whole class turns around and goes, No, please, we're here because we want to be. We asked him if we could live on Mars, and he's explaining to us in the break. And the principal just looks at me, and I give him this little shrug. I'm like, "Yeah, what can you do?" And he starts laughing and he walks out. And as he walked away laughing, I remember thinking, I don't want this year to end. And that plan of becoming a geologist, I never went back to it. And this became my whole life. Now, here's what I couldn't see back then. We had a word for those kids. Unteachable. And it pointed at them like the problem lived inside of the teenager. But nothing was wrong with their curiosity. It was all still there. It was all still there. It was just waiting for one adult to make the world worth looking at. And that changes the question. So instead of asking what's wrong with teenagers, maybe we should ask what happens to a teacher who's expected to manage 15 of them, finish the curriculum, keep everyone quiet, and somehow still make the world feel worth wondering about. Because for 10 years I thought Mars was the proof of all of this. Until that one student found me in a gym. And so this is just a funny story. So 10 years later, I'm in the gym. And there's this huge big guy, this muscular guy, comes up to me. And he goes, "Hey, you're Mr. Huisman, right? Do you remember me?" And I was looking at the kid and I was like, And he said, I'm Chris. I'm Chris. You remember from 1D? And I started looking at him like this huge guy. And I said, are you Chris? And I knew his last name. I'm not going to mention it in here. And I said, oh, yeah. How you doing, man? And I have to tell you about Chris. Chris was one of the worst behaving students of that year. And, constantly being expelled, and he wasn't allowed to go to school for a week or something like. And then, and he tells me, do you know what I do right now? And he was a policeman. He said, dude, I'm so sorry for all that time. I was really bad behaving student and blah, blah, blah. And he started telling me this story about how he kind of came to senses and started and wanting to be a policeman. And then he looked at me and said, dude, there was still this one lesson that I will never forget. And he said it always stuck with me. And the moment he said that, because this is such an important part of my life, that one Mars lesson was such an important part of my life. And I couldn't believe that this is the stories that stuck in his head. So I feel like excited of becoming a teacher. And he looks at me, you remember that class where you explained about the clitoris? And then I was like, holy shit. Yes, I do remember. And I do remember because it was a class when I came up to 1D, I walked in the classroom. Obviously, that was not the Mars lesson. And probably forgot about the Mars lesson. I don't know. So I walked in, and these 15 students are asking me, because I had a whole plan for the lesson. I'm not quite sure what the plan was, to say, can you please explain us what a clitoris is? And I looked at the classroom. It's like, we've been trying to ask 4 teachers and nobody wants to explain it to us. And I go like, yeah, what the hell? It's 1D. And what can you expect from 1D? That was kind of like, the best thing you can expect is have a class sitting at there listening at you for like 40 minutes. That was, but doesn't matter. So I started explaining, and obviously, with my drawing skills, starting to draw the worst imaginable picture of a clitoris. And I basically, talked to them for about 10 minutes, and it was fun for them, and we just had a big laugh about it. Now, the point is, I spent 10 years thinking the lesson that stuck with them was about Mars, and Chris reminded me it never was. It was about what happens when a teenager asks an honest question, and an adult who doesn't make them feel stupid for asking it. It was the feeling of having your question taken seriously. So when people tell me this generation has given up with the phones and the attention spans, they just don't care anymore. And I think about that classroom, and I think about the gym, and I don't buy it. So kids haven't lost their wonder. Too often, we've just stopped giving that wonder somewhere to go. So that's actually the reason I started building something called Path of Wonders a year and a half ago, after years of traveling, a long stretch of that in India. And I want to be careful here, because this isn't really about school versus homeschool. So I've taught homeschool kids who were sharper than most adults I know, but I've also taught teenagers who came out of homeschooling and couldn't read or write. So it was never really about the method. It's about whether the person in front of them made the world worth being curious about. And that's the whole idea behind courses like the Attention Heist, the Inheritance Quest, the Science of Wonder, lessons built to do on purpose what that Mars afternoon did completely by accident. So no teenager is unteachable. Sometimes they're just waiting for one adult to take their question seriously.